If they cross a line that breaks your soul and you still stay, you're not loving them, you're abandoning yourself. Because the truth is simple. The moment someone shows you they can disrespect you without fear of losing you, that's the moment you lose your power. Let me ask you something. How many times are you going to call it a mistake when deep down, you know, it's a pattern? There's a line in every relationship, not spoken, not written, but felt. It's the line where respect ends and excuses begin. And once someone crosses that line, lies to your face, betrays your trust, disrespects your heart, you have a decision to make. Not about them, but about you. Because people don't repeat what they regret, they repeat what you tolerate. Read that again. They don't keep doing it because they forgot it hurt you. They do it because they learned you'll stay anyway. And every time you forgive without consequences, every time you say it's okay when it's clearly not, you teach them something dangerous, that your boundaries are negotiable, that your pain is acceptable, that your presence is guaranteed no matter how they treat you. And that's where you lose yourself. See, love was never supposed to cost you your dignity. It was never meant to make you question your worth. It was never designed to turn you into someone who begs for basic respect. But that's what happens when you ignore the line. You start shrinking, you start justifying, you start staying in places that are slowly breaking you. And the worst part? You think leaving makes you weak. Number. Staying where you are not valued, that's what breaks you. Walking away, that takes strength. That takes courage. That takes a level of self-respect most people are too afraid to reach. Because walking away means accepting a hard truth that sometimes the person you love is the person you need to let go. Not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself more. If this hits you, don't ignore it. Your heart knows the truth you keep avoiding. Choose yourself, even if it hurts. Because losing them is better than losing you. So if they cross that line, don't argue, don't beg, don't explain. Just walk away, silently, powerfully, forever. Self-respect comes before love, but most people only understand that after they've already given too much of themselves away. In the beginning, it never feels like you're losing anything. It feels like you're investing, like you're being patient, like you're choosing understanding over ego. You tell yourself that love requires sacrifice, that no relationship is perfect, that if you just hold on a little longer, things will get better. But there's a silent shift that happens when you stop putting someone else above your own worth. You stop listening to that inner voice that once guided you so clearly. The voice that said, this doesn't feel right, slowly gets quieter until one day it's almost gone. When self-respect is missing, love turns into survival. You're no longer in a relationship because it fulfills you, you're in it because you're afraid to lose it. You begin to accept things you once said you never would. Disrespect starts to feel normal. Being ignored starts to feel expected. Apologies without change start to feel like closure. And without realizing it, you've lowered your standards so much that even the bare minimum feels like something to be grateful for. That's the danger of putting love before self-respect. It distorts your reality. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't demand that you silence your needs or tolerate behavior that breaks your spirit. But when self-respect is weak, you start confusing attachment with love. You hold on tighter the more it hurts, thinking that your endurance proves your loyalty. You believe that if you just love harder, give more, forgive faster, they'll finally see your value. But people don't recognize your value because of how much you give. They recognize it because of what you refuse to accept. There's a moment in every unhealthy situation where you know deep down that something is wrong. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet and persistent. It shows up in the way your energy changes around them, in the way you overthink simple conversations, in the way you feel anxious instead of secure. That feeling is your self-respect trying to wake you up. But too often people ignore it because facing the truth means making a difficult choice, choosing. Self-respect means being willing to lose what disrespects you. And that's where most people hesitate. Because walking away isn't just about leaving a person, it's about letting go of the future you imagine with them. It's about accepting that the version of them you hope for may never exist. It's about facing loneliness, uncertainty, and the fear of starting over. So instead of choosing themselves, they choose comfort. They choose familiarity. They choose to stay, even when staying is slowly breaking them. But here's the truth. Every time you choose someone else over your self-respect, you send a message to yourself that you are not enough. And the more you repeat that message, the more you start to believe it. That's how people lose themselves in relationships. Not all at once, but piece by piece. A boundary ignored here, a red flag excused there, a moment of disrespect brushed off like it didn't matter. Until one day you look at your life and realize you don't even recognize the person you become. Self-respect is not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about knowing your worth and standing by it even when it's uncomfortable. It's about having the courage to say this is not acceptable, even if it means losing someone you care about. Because the right person will never require you to abandon yourself just to keep them. The right person will meet you at your level, not pull you below it. When you truly understand self-respect, your entire perspective on love changes. You stop chasing. You stop begging. You stop trying to convince people to treat you right. Instead, you become selective. You become intentional. You start choosing people who naturally align with your values instead of trying to force connection where it doesn't belong. And most importantly, you become willing to walk away the moment your worth is compromised. Because at the end of the day, love should add to your life, not take away from who you are. And the moment it starts, costing you your peace, your confidence, and your identity, that's not love anymore. That's a lesson. And self-respect is what gives you the strength to finally learn it and move on. Boundaries define your value, even if you've never said a single word about them out loud. People often think value is something you prove by how much you give, how patient you are, or how much you can endure without breaking. But that's not how value works in real life. Your value is revealed in what you allow, what you tolerate, and where you decide to draw the line. Because the moment you fail to set boundaries, you silently give permission for others to decide how far they can go with you. In the beginning, most boundary violations don't feel extreme. They show up in small ways, being dismissed in conversations, having your feelings minimized, promises being broken and brushed off like they didn't matter. And instead of addressing it, you tell yourself it's not a big deal. You don't want to seem difficult. You don't want to create conflict, so you stay quiet. But every time you ignore something that bothers you, you send a message, not just to them, but to yourself. You're saying that your comfort, your voice, and your standards are negotiable. The problem is people learn you through your behavior, not your intentions. You might believe you deserve respect, honesty, and consistency, but if your actions don't reflect that, those beliefs mean nothing. If someone disrespects you and you stay, they don't think, I should change. They think this must be acceptable. And once that idea settles in, it becomes the foundation of how they treat you moving forward. Boundaries are not about controlling someone else's actions. They're about controlling your response to those actions. You can't force someone to respect you, but you can decide what happens if they don't. That's where your power lies. Because without consequences, boundaries are just empty words. And people don't take empty words seriously. Many people struggle with boundaries because they associate them with loss. They think if they speak up, they'll push the other person away. They think if they enforce limits, they'll come across as cold or unloving. So they choose to be flexible, understanding, and forgiving, even when it's hurting them. But what they don't realize is that the absence of boundaries doesn't create stronger relationships, it creates imbalanced ones. When there are no clear limits, one person ends up giving more, tolerating more, and sacrificing more, while the other takes advantage, sometimes without even realizing it. And over time, that imbalance leads to resentment. You start feeling unappreciated, unheard, and emotionally drained. Not because the other person is entirely at fault, but because you never made it clear where your limits were in the first place. Healthy relationships require clarity. They require both people to understand what is acceptable and what is not. And that clarity comes from boundaries. It comes from being able to say, this is how I expect to be treated. And more importantly, this is what I will not tolerate. That's not being demanding. That's being self-aware. There's also a deeper truth that many people avoid setting boundaries will reveal who truly values you and who doesn't. Because the moment you stop overgiving, stop over-explaining, and stop accepting less than you deserve, some people will change their behavior and others will walk away. And that's where the fear comes in. Because losing people is uncomfortable. It feels like rejection. It feels like failure. But in reality, it's clarity. Anyone who only stays in your life when you have no boundaries was never respecting you in the first place. They were benefiting from your lack of limits. And once those limits appear, their reaction tells you everything you need to know. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are standards that define how you want to be treated. They create a space where respect can exist, where communication can be honest, and where both people feel valued. Without them, relationships become confusing, inconsistent, and emotionally exhausting. And the most important boundary you'll ever set is the one you set with yourself. The decision that no matter how much you care about someone, you will not allow them to disrespect you. The commitment that your peace, your dignity, and your self-worth are not up for negotiation. Because once you understand that, everything changes. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen. You stop chasing validation from those who withhold it. You stop tolerating behavior that contradicts what you know you deserve. And instead, you start standing firm in who you are and what you represent. That's when your value becomes clear, not because you said it, but because you lived it. And when your boundaries are strong, the wrong people won't feel comfortable staying, and the right people won't even think about crossing the line. Repeated behavior is a choice, not a mistake, and that's a truth people struggle to accept because it forces them to see reality without excuses. The first time something happens, you might call it an accident. You might believe it was a misunderstanding, a bad moment, a lapse in judgment. You give the benefit of the doubt because you care, because you want to believe in the good you see in them. And that's human. That's natural. But the second time, the third time, that's no longer confusion, that's confirmation. Patterns don't lie. They reveal intention without needing words. When someone keeps doing the same thing that hurts, you, despite knowing how it affects you, they're not forgetting. They're not unaware. They're choosing comfort over accountability, choosing their habits over your feelings, choosing to repeat what they know they can get away with. And this is where many people get stuck. They keep focusing on what the person says instead of what the person does. They hold on to apologies, promises, emotional speeches about change. It won't happen again. I didn't mean it. I'll do better. Those words feel good in the moment. They give you hope. They make it easier to stay. But real change is never proven through words, it's proven through consistent action over time. The problem is, when you want something to work, you start measuring effort instead of results. You start saying, at least they're trying, even when the behavior hasn't actually changed. You lower your expectations just enough to make their inconsistency feel acceptable. And without realizing it, you shift from expecting respect to negotiating for it. But here's the reality: people don't accidentally develop patterns. A pattern is a reflection of priorities. If someone continues to lie, it means honesty is not their priority. If someone continues to disrespect you, it means your feelings are not their priority. If someone continues to cross your boundaries, it means respecting those boundaries is not important enough for them to change. And it's not always because they're intentionally trying to hurt you. Sometimes it's simply because they don't value the relationship the same way you do. They may care about you, but not enough to adjust their behavior. Not enough to break their habits. Not enough to do the work that real change requires. That's a difficult truth to accept because it challenges the idea that love alone is enough. It makes you realize that someone can have feelings for you and still not treat you the way you deserve. And when you're emotionally invested, it's easier to believe in potential than to accept reality. You start focusing on who they could be instead of who they consistently show you they are. But potential doesn't build relationships, patterns do. If someone shows you over and over again that they will hurt you, ignore your needs, or break your trust, then what you're seeing is not a phase. It's a cycle. And cycles only continue as long as they are allowed to. The moment you keep accepting repeated behavior, you become part of that cycle, not because you are responsible for their actions, but because you're allowing those actions to remain in your life without consequence. Breaking that cycle requires clarity. It requires you to stop asking, why are they like this? And start asking, why am I accepting this? Because the more you tolerate repeated behavior, the more you train yourself to believe that this is what you deserve. And once that belief settles in, it becomes harder to walk away, even when you know you should. There's also a hidden cost. To ignoring repeated behavior, it slowly erodes your self-trust. Every time you say, this is the last time, and then stay when it happens again, you weaken your own word. You begin to doubt your ability to make decisions that protect you. You start feeling stuck, not because you don't have options, but because you no longer trust yourself to choose differently. That's why recognizing patterns is so important. It's not about judging someone or labeling them as bad. It's about seeing clearly. It's about understanding that consistency reveals truth in a way that words never can. And once you see that truth, you have a responsibility to yourself to act on it. Because at some point it stops being about what they're doing and it becomes about what you're allowing. And the moment you accept that repeated behavior is a choice, everything changes. You stop making excuses for them. You stop waiting for a version of them that may never exist. You stop investing your energy into something that has already shown you its limits. Instead, you start making choices too. Choices that protect your peace. Choices that honor your worth. Choices that break cycles instead of continuing them. Because if they can choose to repeat what hurts you, you can choose to walk away from it. Forgiveness doesn't mean access. But a lot of people confuse the two because they've been taught that forgiving someone requires letting them back into the same space they once had in your life. They believe that if they truly forgive, they have to restore everything: communication, closeness, trust, and emotional availability exactly the way it was before. But that idea is what keeps people trapped in cycles that keep hurting them. Forgiveness is internal. It's something you do for your own peace, not for their comfort. It's the process of releasing anger, resentment, and the emotional weight that someone's actions placed on you. It's about freeing yourself from constantly replaying what happened, from carrying that pain into every moment of your life. But access, that's external. That's about who you allow into your space, your time, your energy, and your heart. And those two things are not the same. You can forgive someone and still decide they no longer deserve the same level of closeness. You can let go of bitterness and still walk away. You can wish them well and still choose distance. Because forgiveness is about healing, not reopening doors that should remain closed. The confusion begins when people feel guilty for creating space after forgiving. They think, if I've truly forgiven them, why can't I just move on with them? And the answer is simple: because trust is not restored by forgiveness alone. Trust is built through consistent, reliable behavior over time. And when someone has already broken that trust, it's not your responsibility to pretend it never happened just because you've chosen to forgive. What many people don't realize is that forgiveness without boundaries often leads to repeated pain. When you forgive and immediately give someone full access again, without any change in behavior or accountability, you're essentially resetting the situation without addressing the problem. You're giving them another opportunity to do the same thing while hoping for a different outcome. And hope without change is not a strategy, it's a risk. There's also a deeper emotional layer to this. Sometimes people use forgiveness as a way to avoid confrontation or difficult decisions. It feels easier to say, I forgive you, than to say, I can't have you in my life anymore. Forgiveness becomes a way to maintain connection, even when that connection is unhealthy. But in doing that, they sacrifice their own peace just to keep someone else close. Real forgiveness requires honesty. It requires you to acknowledge the impact of what happened and to accept that things may never go back to how they were. And that's okay. Not every relationship is meant to continue after trust is broken. Some people are meant to teach you a lesson, not remain in your life forever. When you separate forgiveness from access, you regain control over your life. You stop feeling obligated to keep people around just because you've chosen to let go of resentment. You understand that protecting your energy is just as important as healing your heart. And you realize that closure doesn't always come from rebuilding, it often comes from releasing. There's strength in being able to say, I forgive you, but I can't allow you to have the same place in my life anymore. That's not bitterness. That's clarity. That's self-awareness. That's growth. And the truth is, not everyone deserves access to the healed version of you. Some people only knew you when you were more tolerant, more forgiving, more willing to overlook things that hurt you. But once you grow, once you become more aware of your worth, you start making different decisions. You start choosing who gets to be close to you based on their actions, not just your feelings. Access should be earned, not assumed. It should be given to those who show consistency, respect, and genuine care. And when someone has shown you that they can't meet those standards, it's not your job to lower them just to keep them around. Forgiveness is powerful, but only when it's paired with wisdom. Without wisdom, it turns into a cycle of giving people endless chances without any real change. With wisdom, it becomes a tool for healing and growth, allowing you to move forward without carrying the past with you. At the end of the day, you have the right to decide who has access to you. You have the right to protect your peace, your time, and your emotional well-being. And you don't owe anyone a place in your life just because you've forgiven them. Because forgiveness sets you free, but boundaries keep you safe. Walking away is power, not weakness, but it rarely feels that way in the moment. In fact, it often feels like the exact opposite. It feels like loss, like failure, like giving up on something you invested your time, your emotions, and your hopes into. You question yourself. You wonder if you could have tried harder, been more patient, said the right thing at the right time. Your mind searches for Reasons to stay, because staying feels familiar even if it hurts. Walking away, on the other hand, feels uncertain, and people often confuse uncertainty with weakness. But the truth is, there's nothing weak about choosing yourself in a situation that is slowly breaking you. What's actually difficult, what actually requires strength, is letting go of something your heart is still attached to. Anyone can stay where it's comfortable, even if it's painful. Anyone can keep hoping that things will magically improve. But it takes a different level of courage to look at reality, accept it for what it is, and make a decision that protects your peace, even when it hurts. Walking away is not about running from problems. It's about recognizing when a problem is no longer yours to fix. It's understanding that you cannot force someone to change, no matter how much you care about them. You cannot love someone into becoming a better version of themselves if they're not willing to do that work on their own. And staying in that situation hoping your presence will somehow transform them only drains you. A lot of people stay because they've already invested so much. Time, energy, emotions, memories that all feels too valuable to let go of. They think walking away means all of that was wasted. But what they don't realize is that staying in something that continues to hurt them only increases the cost. Every extra day spent in the wrong place is another piece of yourself being given away. Walking away doesn't erase what happened, it prevents further damage. There's also fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Fear that you won't find something better. These fears are real and they can feel overwhelming. But staying in a situation that doesn't respect you just to avoid those fears is not strength, it's self-abandonment. Because in trying to avoid losing someone else, you end up losing yourself. Walking away is an act of self-respect. It's a statement that says, I deserve better than this. Not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded, honest way. It's acknowledging that your peace matters, your feelings matter, and your well-being is not something you're willing to compromise indefinitely. And once you reach that point, your decisions start to change. You stop chasing explanations from people who don't communicate clearly. You stop waiting for effort from people who have shown you inconsistency. You stop holding on to potential and start focusing on reality. And most importantly, you stop settling for less than what you know you deserve. There's a quiet strength in walking away. It doesn't always come with loud words or dramatic endings. Sometimes it's simply a decision you make within yourself. A moment where you realize that you can't keep going like this, that something has to change. And instead of trying to change the other person, you change your direction. And yes, it hurts. Walking away doesn't mean you suddenly stop caring. It doesn't mean the memories disappear or that the emotions shut off overnight. You may still miss them. You may still think about what could have been. But pain doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. It means you made a difficult one. Over time, that pain begins to shift. What once felt like loss starts to feel like relief. The anxiety you used to carry starts to fade. The constant overthinking, the emotional ups and downs, the feeling of not being enough, all of that begins to loosen its grip. And in that space, something new starts to grow. Clarity. You begin to see things more clearly than you did before. You recognize patterns you ignored. You understand your own needs better. You reconnect with parts of yourself that you had set aside. And slowly you rebuild your sense of self, not based on someone else's behavior, but on your own values. Walking away also sets a new standard for your life. It sends a message, not just to others, but to yourself, that you are no longer willing to accept less than you deserve. And that standard becomes the foundation for everything moving forward. The relationships you choose, the boundaries you set, the way you show up for yourself, it all changes. Because once you had the courage to walk away from something that was wrong for you, it becomes harder to settle again. So no, walking away is not weakness. It's not quitting. It's not giving up. It's choosing growth over comfort. It's choosing peace over chaos. It's choosing yourself over a situation that no longer serves you. And that is one of the most powerful decisions you will ever make.